Tic Tac craft was of terrestrial origin and was being tested against the Navy's new radar tracking technology in 2004. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office wasn't created to investigate UAPs, it was built to sanitize the truth. US Navy acknowledges that an official policy of stigma and ridicule of UFOs dated back to the 1950s and the CIA. Another former government official has come forward to confirm that crashed UFOs involving non-human intelligence have been secretly recovered and photographed. Starlink has become so successful that it is now funding future SpaceX missions to Mars. These stories and more on Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome, everyone, to the May 31 edition of Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review. I want to thank people who have been sending me their prayers and healing suggestions. I definitely have benefited. I feel so much better, and I want to thank everyone that has been sending their prayers, and thanks also to those individuals that have helped me directly, and that is Jerry Wills, Dr. David Clements, and of course connecting to the Star family. That also helps. So thank you all for your prayers. I am feeling much, much better and looking forward to a big year. So let's begin this week's news in review. Here is a tweet, a X post by Jason Wilder, and he talks about a massive underground pyramid buried in the Alaskan wilderness, apparently not a crumbling temple or a half-buried stone relic, but a black geometric monolith said to dwarf the Great Pyramid of Giza, all hidden beneath the permafrost near Mount Denali, or Mount McKinley, I believe that was its former name. First brought to light in a NBC news broadcast in 1992, allegedly during seismic readings from a Chinese nuclear test, then silence, no recordings, no transcripts, just gone. And suddenly all mentions of it buried faster than the artifact itself. So clearly there was something that showed up on this this Chinese testing, and then it all went silence. Okay, so here we have a retired US Army intelligence officer, Douglas Mutschler, coming forward claiming the US government has known about this structure since the 1960s. It allegedly emits energy, some kind of unknown power signature, and it's been a restricted zone ever since. Denali is surrounded by military installations, unreachable terrain, off limits. Local reports hear deep hums, seeing strange lights, and some even disappearing while seeking the site. Indigenous law speaks of sleeping gods beneath the mountains and forbidden zones where the earth speaks, but we pretend it's just myth. So this is a discovery that has been brought to light again because of this retired US Army intelligence officer, Douglas Mutschler, coming forward. Now, what I find very interesting about this particular site, this mountain, and what is allegedly there, is that in the 1970s, a very famous remote viewer, Pat Price, so this must have, I'm not sure if this was before or after actually I think it must have been after, because the NBC News broadcast this in 1952 during because of the seismic readings from a Chinese nuclear test. Okay, so now you have Pat Price. So we're talking nearly 20 years earlier, Pat Price did a remote viewing session And he was a former police officer, and he did a remote viewing where he saw a large underground base near Mount Denali where humans and extraterrestrials were working. This hidden pyramid is very likely connected to that underground base. So, we've got seismic readings, we've got a retired Army intelligence officer, and you have remote viewing of Pat Price nearly 20 years earlier, all pointing to something underneath Mount Denali, or Mount McKinley, I think, as it's now officially known, because of President Trump's renaming of it. And of course, you've got local legends and reports of sounds all coming through it, and all of these army bases, military installations near it. Certainly something is there. All right, here is another ex-post by Jason Wild that I thought was very, very interesting. And he's talking about the Vajra. Most people think a Vajra is just a religious trinket, a symbolic thunderbolt used in Buddhist rituals, a prop for monks in robes. But in the 1930s, British intelligence confiscated one in remote Nepal that wasn't symbolic at all. It hummed when you breathed on it. It pulsed when exposed to steam. It triggered radio interference. So some kind of ancient artifact that looked very much like a Vajra. And here's the symbols of the Vajra. So let me go on with what Jason Wild had observed about this discovery in the 1930s. It wasn't hollow, it wasn't carved, it looked like metal, but metallurgists couldn't identify the alloy. It had internal moving parts that no one could see, but everyone felt, and then it vanished, shipped off to a private MI6 vault and never seen again. Let me repeat that: a tantric weapon that responded to human breath and mantras emitting electromagnetic pulses was seized and buried by British intelligence. It was real enough to be classified, boxed, and handed to a now defunct subunit of MI6 in esoteric warfare. The object named the Tibetan Battery was referenced decades later by a retired archivist who admitted it terrified the physicists more than uranium. Well, that's interesting. Ancient tantras never said Vajras were symbolic. The oldest Dzogchen texts describe them as binders of the storm, storage for awakened intent, and bridges to the other planes. Vajras weren't props, they were technology designed for people who knew how to control consciousness, frequency, and energy fields. Somewhere along the way, the knowledge was lost, buried under incense, smoke, and doctrine. But once in a while, something slips through, and when it does, the system buries it. Okay, so what we know then is that British intelligence in the 1930s found one of these Vajras and then shipped it off to some vault, and that physicists that studied it were very frightened of it because it contained some power. Now, why is this relevant today? Well, it's relevant because I've come across two contactees who have described these thunderbolt type weapons they witnessed or used. One was JP, who described putting on one of his fingers a ring weapon, and when he put the ring weapon on, so here's a ring, so he put the ring weapon on, and when he squeezed his hand, a laser pulsed out of it and hit a target. So, I mean, that's quite a weapon right there. So, and we have described that in book 1 of US Army Insider Missions, where he described this feline extraterrestrial, very old, very ancient-looking feline being who was a weapons master of some kind, and he and his companion were both taken to this location, and they had to put on the ring and tested it. I can't remember how many people were involved in the actual testing, but this feline extraterrestrial was training a number of people that included JP and his companion, and that this was part of why the Air Force was very, very interested in JP. This incident occurred, as I recall, around 2016, and the military were very interested in recruiting JP. He said no and kept on saying no, but eventually he relented and joined in at the end of 2019 and began Army training in January 2020. The other person who has experienced or witnessed one of these thunderbolt type weapons, a Vajra, is Elena Denham. And she described going onto the flagship of Prince Ea or Enki, and his flagship is called Nibiru. And he happens to be, I guess, a very big, let's just say, fan of ancient weapon systems. And he had a Vajra that he showed her, and he activated it. And it was kind of like a Star Wars weapon, like the laser weapon. And so she saw that on the flagship of the Nibiru. So these Star Wars type weapons that emit thunderbolts do exist, and so it's no surprise that MI6 is hiding a similar weapon found in ancient ruins. Okay, so here is my update with JP, space arc activations, and the deep state. So this update, it is something you can watch. So what JP describes is that he went into an auditorium after going to this Air Force base, Eglin Air Force Base, where he actually served for the bulk of his 4 years with the US Army. Yeah, that does happen. There's multi-service bases, and Eglin is a huge Air Force base, and they do have some of the other military services with units there. So JP, even though he was with the US Army, he was based at Eglin. So JP went into this auditorium where there were 80 people split into two sides of about 40 each. On one side were 40 Nordic extraterrestrials who had crew cuts and wore Air Force uniforms with distinctive patches. They were dressed and looked the same as the Nordic who visited him in a flying saucer in 2018, who offered to take him for a ride, and whose departing spacecraft was photographed by JP. So if you go to the page I've created for JP on exopolitics.org, you can find all of my articles going back to 2018, including photographs, and you can see the photos of the flying saucer that carried this Nordic extraterrestrials with a crew cut and wearing an Air Force uniform with a distinctive patch. You got the photo there. So, this is one of those examples where JP's story actually is supported by a photograph. And there are dozens of photographs that I have on my website of the various experiences JP had in 2017, 2018. Unfortunately, when he joined the military, when he went on missions, he couldn't take his phone with him. But sometimes he would go with Nordics, and they would allow him to take photographs of their departing craft. So there were a couple of photos during JP's Army service, but those were of Nordic craft. Okay, so he's in this auditorium. There's 80 people, 40 are Nordics, 40 are various Air Force personnel, and they're watching this 200-inch screen that shows images of space arcs located in various parts of the world, particularly in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, but also had them depicted in other parts of the world. But the ones in the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans were of particular interest because they were moving rapidly under the water. And JP says that the audience was given a briefing that the space arcs were being activated by the deep state and they wanted to use them for nefarious purposes. Now, the thing is, I watched a recent video by Michael Jaco, who's a former Navy SEAL, and he was talking about a increase in activity in the Pacific Rim, especially in the area of Northern California, Oregon, Washington State, and Vancouver, discussing the possibility that you could have some significant seismic activity there that leads to, let's just say, some very severe earthquake activity, even some of the land sinking and so forth. So, widespread devastation there on the Pacific coast. So it's very interesting that he is looking at some of the upsurge in volcanic activity in the Pacific Rim area. Kilauea volcano on the Big Island of Hawaii has been going into an active area, into an active phase, shooting lava plumes of up to 1,000 feet. That's pretty high. I lived in the Kalapana area, the Kaimu Kalapana area of the Big Island of Hawaii, for just over 4 years, and sometimes we could see the lava bursts, from as you would be in that area of Kalapana. So this is very interesting that these space arcs are being activated by the deep state. Apparently, they're generating lots of heat, heating up that area, and apparently this is having an impact on the Pacific Rim, the kind of like those areas that are prone to seismic activity, or one plate moving under another, generating huge seismic activity. That apparently this is what the deep state is doing. And JP says that he and the other soldiers were being briefed about all of this, and that there was going to be a mission, or maybe several missions, to the space arcs to find out what is going on. So JP said that he may be called upon to do a mission to the space arcs. So if he does do that mission, then of course I'm sure he will give us an update and we'll tell you about it. But in the meantime, pay attention to what's happening in the Pacific Rim. Apparently the space arcs are being used to activate the Pacific Ocean, generate great amounts of heat, and this is going to have an impact on seismic activity. And if people like Michael Jaco are accurate, and I know he's made a lot of predictions in the past that haven't quite turned out, but nevertheless, you can still bring out relevant information, and the circumstances are there for some kind of seismic activity in the kind of the coastal west coast of the United States and Canada. Okay, so here we have a post by Joe Mergia, who is having a discussion with another UFO researcher, Dave Beatty. And so in January 29, so Joe Mergia, he says the origins of the Tic Tac may be terrestrial and part of the inventory of a super secret black project within our government. Okay, so this is a conversation he had with Dave Beatty. So Beatty says, I have pondered these questions and come to only a few possibilities. Perhaps the US Air Force was contacted during the preceding week and told about the SPY-1 radar, unknown radar hits Kevin Day has been seeing on the USS Princeton. And when the objects appeared that day with jets in the air, these same people were waiting and sent immediately out to the Nimitz. Perhaps the guys on the Bangor had seen something using classified technology on the plane, so they were asked to sign non-disclosure agreements, and the government does not know what the Tic Tacs are. So what Dave Beatty was referring to here is that you had the USS Nimitz where the fighter squadrons were taking off and they were encountering UFOs that were shaped like Tic Tacs and taking photographs of those and visually seeing them. But on the USS Princeton, there was this new radar that was being tested, and that was also picking up these Tic Tac UFOs. And this radar, called the the Spy 1 radar, that was recording this Tic Tac UFO, and Kevin Day was the Navy serviceman who talked about the Spy 1 radar and how these two personnel with the Air Force were able to come on to the USS Princeton, and they had the authority to command his superior officer to turn over the radar tracking to them. So that suggests that the Air Force was involved in some way in some classified program that was more highly classified than this Spy 1 radar that was being tested by the Navy. And so that certainly was very suggestive that whatever the Tic Tac was, that the Air Force had something to do with it. So this was, I think, something that hinted that the Tic Tac UFO was very much associated with some classified program that was being tested against it. Another scenario would be the US government has advanced unconventional and non-aerodynamic flight platforms. These would have to be anti-gravity based on all information we have from witnesses. If so, these craft would be from special access programs, black budget programs, and decades more advanced than any known aircraft. Okay, so this is lending itself to this same scenario where you have something that the US Air Force has that is being tested. Well, you could have two scenarios here. One is that the US Air Force knew about the craft that were flying out there, and they wanted to confiscate the film because they wanted to know more about it. And you could make the case that, okay, maybe these were non-human intelligence. But the other scenario was that these were actually craft that were built by the US corporations, and that these were being flight tested, and that these Air Force officers that went on to the USS Nimitz, they were part of that testing. So what I think is very relevant here is that there is a precedent for this, that there is a precedent for new radar tracking technology being tested against exotic spacecraft developed either by US corporations or recovered from crashes and somehow have been repaired and are being flight tested. Now, the precedent is that, okay, so in 2004, you had the Tic Tac craft sightings and radar trackings and so forth. From 1979 to 1983, Niara Islay served with the US Air Force, and in 1980, she was transferred for 3 months to Tonopah Test Range in Nevada. So she was trained in auto track radar, and that was a new radar tracking system. And she was asked to use it against an unknown craft, which she later saw was a flying saucer. So, what happened was that she was in the facility and she was trained to use auto-tracked radar. So she was using that, and it was tracking some unknown object out there. So when the test was concluded, she made the mistake of going out on the, I think it was some kind of deck. She went out on a deck to relax, and apparently there was someone else that was there, one other gentleman that was there doing similar auto track radar. work, and both of them saw a flying saucer, which they were not supposed to see. That's when all hell broke uh, for them. They were then subjected to trauma-based mind control and abused in many, many ways. So I discussed her experience in an interview we did, in the first interview we did. Whistleblower exposes slave labor in US Air Force secret space program. So she was, really put through the ringer because she saw this flying saucer when she went with another radar tracking specialist to just relax on the deck of a facility where they were asked to track an unknown object. And when she went out, she saw it, and they then subjected her to this slave labor program that was being run in conjunction by extraterrestrials and the US Air Force. So we describe all of that, or she describes all of that in this interview we did. So you can go to exopolitics.org to see that interview, Whistleblower Exposes Slave Labor. So this is, I think, very relevant because what it is a precedent for the military testing their anti-gravity vehicles, whether they've reverse engineered them or whether these have been found or handed over to them by extraterrestrials. There's a precedent for testing these craft against new radar technologies. So this happened with Niara Isley in 1980, and it also happened in 2004 with this case of the Tic Tac incident and the Spy 1 radar that was being tested on the USS Princeton, or that it was tracking this Tic Tac UFO. Okay, now here is something from Mike Disclosure, a ex-post from him, and what he says is that the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office wasn't created to investigate UAPs, it was built to sanitize the truth. So here's a ex-post by Representative Anna Paulina Luna, and what she says is that the government has a spending problem. After reviewing our investigations through the Oversight Task Force, I'm now convinced that the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office should be defunded. There is another organization doing a better job than AARO, and they're offering full transparency. Okay, so let's hear what was said about the AARO office that has led to it being regarded as really doing nothing in terms of disclosing the truth about UFOs or UAPs, and instead thwarting the will of Congress. Okay, so this is Christopher Mellon doing an article. Okay, so that was back in 2014. What is kind of newsworthy here is that Representative Anna Luna on May 28 is saying that the AARO office should be defunded because it's not doing its job. And here you have this tweet by Mike Disclosure referencing Anna Paulina Luna and David Grush and others, basically saying that the AARO office is absolutely not doing its job, and so it should be defunded, and that it, in fact, is sanitizing the truth. All right, so there you have it, that the AARO office has been called out by a number of whistleblowers, starting with Christopher Mellon in 2014. Then you have uh, then you have Representative Anna Luna calling it out for really not doing its job in investigating whistleblower testimonies such as that from David Grush. We know that Jason Sands also went and gave the AARO office his testimony. I believe Jacob Barber did the same. So AARO is not doing its office, and so there are more and more people are calling for its its defunding. And I guess if it's defunded, then would Congress actually rescind the legislation creating AARO? And that would be definitely a setback for all of those wanting the truth to come out. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about Golden Dome. Now, Golden Dome is allegedly aimed at setting up a futuristic space-based weapon system to stop potential ballistic missile attacks against the US and North America. Okay, so let's have a look at what the plan is. So this is supposedly Golden Dome, and you have a kind of report here from CBS discussing how Golden Dome would operate. That it was something that was passed by Donald Trump, or let's just say initiated by Donald Trump in terms of some initial funding, and now a bill has gone before the US Congress, which is asking for several $100 billion. I think it was $250 billion for creating a Golden Dome defense system that would protect the United States and Canada if it agreed to also be covered by it. That it would protect the United States from all kinds of ballistic missile attacks. So Golden Dome, as this, as you can see a little bit about how it would operate, it would be both a ground-based and a space-based weapons system that would destroy ballistic missiles that were coming towards the United States. Now, what really is, I think, very important to point out here is that the real intent behind Golden Dome, I don't think, is at all to shoot down ballistic missiles. I think it's more about shooting down UFOs. And we have a precedent that there have been directed energy weapons that have been in existence since the early 1990s that have been used against UFO alien craft. So the most famous incident was the one involving STS-48. So this happened in 1991, and here you see a UFO. Okay, so this is a UFO. It's STS-48. I think that was, I can't remember which space shuttle that was, but you saw it makes an abrupt turn. So makes an abrupt turn to evade some kind of weapon that is shot out from space. Okay, so here you have UFOs, all kinds of UFOs being seen. Oh, okay, we went past it. So here, I'll play it again for you. So here you have this UFO here. It is moving, and actually, it's this UFO. Sorry, that's my bad. Okay, so let me play that again for you so we don't get confused. Okay, so there's a UFO that shortly appears. Here we go. This is it. It's moving in a straight line and now makes a right angle turn. And you see something being shot up. And that was a directed energy weapon. And according to analysis by a Dr. Jack Kasher, it was traced to Pine Gap in Australia. Very interesting, but it shows that these directed energy weapons have been in operation since the early 1990s. So I think that the real intent behind the Golden Dome kind of anti-ballistic missile shield is to transfer these directed energy weapons assets over to the US Space Force, which is now taking control of the defense of the United States satellite system and the continental US against any kind of attack that's based in space. And ballistic weapons do go into space. They have a kind of hyperbolic trajectory that takes them into space, and then it does the big hyperbolic curve and then comes down and lands somewhere in the United States. So for that period where it passes into space, that puts it into the purview of the United States Space Force, which is in control of all satellite defense and the satellite system itself. And so Golden Dome, that all would be, all of that funding would go over to the US Space Force. And I think really what's going on here is that rather than the US Space Force getting new satellites that are capable of tracking and intercepting ballistic missiles that pass into space or while they're taking off on Earth, that what's really happening is that Space Force is going to be getting these directed energy weapons systems that have been in existence for over 30 years. It's going to look as though, or the claim is going to be that these are new weapon systems that are part of the, of the Golden Dome, and that in fact, this is old technology being handed over to the newest space service, or to the newest military service, which is the Space Force. And in the process, the military industrial complex gets more funding because Space Force is going to get a lot of money for building new technologies, which have already been built. These technologies have already been built. They're classified. They'll be handed over to Space Force, but there's going to be a kind of program where Space Force is going to claim these are new technologies, and so it gets the funding, and that funding will make its way over to the military-industrial complex. Okay, so here's a commentary I did now on multiple platforms. Well, this was my commentary. What I'm doing now once a week is these commentaries where I talk about a topical issue, something that I've discussed in the past, or an article discusses those. So I plan to do one of these a week, a commentary, which will be recorded on video and then posted a few days later online on my various sites: Patreon, YouTube, Rumble, and Spotify. Those are the 4 video sites that it's posted on. And so I discussed the Confederation of Planets, the Galactic Federation, and the Galactic Federation of Worlds, or contrast, in galactic conflict resolution. Okay, so let me read out the opening paragraph. Positively oriented galactic associations have intervened in human affairs using very different conflict resolution approaches. On the one hand, there is a spiritually oriented, almost pacifist organization that goes by names such as Confederation of Planets, Galactic Confederation, Confederation of Light, etc. On the other hand, organizations such as the Galactic Federation of Worlds and the Ashtar Command are more military-oriented and interventionist in dealing with negative extraterrestrial activities and influences. The Confederation of Planets takes a more long-term spiritual approach, emphasizing non-violence, cosmic consciousness, education, and love. In short, the Confederation is a loosely bound, non-interventionist, almost pacifist galactic alliance. So if you want to know when were the first references to this, you can't look any further than the early Space Brothers reports from people like George Adamski, Howard Menger, Orfeo Angelucci, George Van Tassel. They all talked about this non-interventionist pacifist galactic alliance. Another one was George King and his references to this kind of like to the Space Brothers, and the Space Brothers were exclusively pacifist. Now there have been others that have talked about a federation, or they've used different names. The federation has a more tightly integrated structure that includes a united military that facilitates direct intervention in galactic conflicts. Now, most people watching this are very familiar with the Galactic Federation of Worlds that Elena Danaan and others have talked about, which is a very military organization. Now, in the 1960s, you had whistleblower. Actually, no, they were contactees. Gabriel Green was one, and also Robert Renault was the other. And they talked about the different alliances or different organizations. One corresponded to this Confederation of Planets, and the other corresponded to the Galactic Federation of Worlds. And in my book, Galactic Federations, Councils and Secret Space Programs, has a chapter 3, on the Confederation of Planets. And so I discuss the historical sources behind it, and that's what I went into for the commentary, so you could find out that this organization, the Galactic Federation of Worlds, goes back a long way. You had the Space Brothers in the 1950s. You had Robert Renault, Gabriel Green in the 1960s. Then you had some South American contactees, Sixto Paz Wells, and also Enrique Rincon, all talking about the Confederation of Planets. You had the Ra material in the 1980s. So this is an organization that has been around for a long, long time. And it is spiritual. It is really like involved fifth and sixth density beings, if you like, ascended masters and so forth. Now, and you have on the other hand, the Galactic Federation, which is a much more militaristic, hands-on organization that directly intervenes. Now, both of these organizations have worked side by side, we know, since the 1960s. Now, what has happened is that there's been a lot of confusion because Elena Danaan has said that the Galactic Federation of Light does not exist. So here we get into an issue of semantics, because the early references to this pacifist organization was the Confederation of Planets, other times called the Galactic Confederation, and the Confederation of Light. So it's been known by many names. Now, some people are referring to this pacifist organization as the Galactic Federation of Light. And of course, she points out that organization, or that there's no such organization. Now, personally, I think the Galactic Federation of Light is an oxymoron. I mean, the term itself, how can you have a federation which is centralized and also an organization which is supposedly aimed at light, so love and light? A galactic federation, a federation by principle is centralized, and it has a military wing. It has a military organization. That's why you have, like the United States of America is a confederation, whereas the European Union is a confederation. The United States has a centralized military. The European Union doesn't. So the terminology, a Galactic Federation of Light, there is a problem with that. And, as I said, it's an oxymoron. But nevertheless, people have been talking about this Galactic Federation of Light and doing channelings from it and saying that it's a pacifist organization. And so I just wonder if it's just like, A rose is still called a rose. A rose can be called that by many, is known by many names. So maybe people, it's just a semantics issue. People are confusing Confederation of Planets, Galactic Confederation, with this Galactic Federation of Light. So when Elena says and Prince Ea say Galactic Federation of Light doesn't exist, I think the term itself is a problem. But there is, and this is where we get into the whole thing of, well, is there a kind of pseudo organization out there called it's called the Galactic Federation of Light, that is pretending to be a pacifist organization, but it's really a front for these grey extraterrestrials? That is possible. I don't want to say that it's not possible. I think it is very, very possible. But on the other hand, there is a pacifist organization called the Galactic Confederation, or the Confederation of Planets, which is completely separate to the Galactic Federation of Worlds that Elena works with. So it's complicated, but definitely we need to be very careful with the terminology. Those people who are channeling the Galactic Federation of Light need to be very careful that they are not channeling this fake organization that Elena is wanting to expose. And I think if it's run by grey extraterrestrials, then they're probably imitating the real Confederation of Planets, because, what better way to sow confusion than to create your own fake organization and make it look like it's a combination of the Confederation of Planets and the Galactic Federation of Worlds. So this is where I think we need to be very, very nuanced. But the one thing I want to emphasize is that while the Galactic Federation of Light is a term that may have been appropriated for this fake organization that is working with grey extraterrestrials, there may be those that are just confused, getting their wires crossed, and are really channeling or tuning into to the Galactic Confederation or to the Confederation of Planets, because these organizations, they don't really put a lot of emphasis on terminology, on the name. It's like, some call us the Confederation of Planets, some call us the Galactic Confederation, others call us the Confederation of Light or the Confederation of Stars. This might not be something that they give a lot of attention to, because what they're really more interested in is in raising people's vibrations and telling people that feel the energy or feel our frequency. You need to raise your consciousness so you can feel our frequency, and then you know who we are. So there's nuances here. We need to be very, very careful. So that's what I try to do in my article. Okay, so let's go back now to my Twitter feed. And for those of you that maybe don't know yet, that my Twitter feed is just x.com/Michael Sala. And in the description of this video, I will have the link to all of my tweets or all of my X posts. So you can go directly there from the description. Okay, so here we have the U.S. Navy has released a document that shows that it was released a document that acknowledges that, well, let me read it out here, the Disclosure Party tweet. Official Navy documents show that the US government orchestrated a deliberate effort to create stigma around the UFOs because they feared it would be disruptive to society, and discussed using public education to debunk UFOs through mass media, advertising, business clubs, schools, and even Disney. If you think UFOs are a conspiracy theory, this is why Congress has a constitutional duty to investigate who is responsible for decades of government suppression. So this Navy document appeared on a Reddit tweet, and here is where I want to take you to the document instead. So here is this Navy document that refers to unidentified aerial phenomenon that was recently released by the director of the UAP task force. So this is naval intelligence. So this document has been recently released. You can find it by following the links on my Twitter feed. Here is the relevant page where it talks about the stigma that was associated with reporting of UFOs, and that this traces back to the 1950s and to the CIA. So let me go back now. Let me go back to my original tweet. Okay, so here is this document. This slide from this US Navy document referring to the stigma associated with UFOs. Well, this document that it's referring to, this stigma and the policy that it's referring to, it dates back to the 1953 Robinson panel. And this panel, the Robinson panel, made recommendations that became part of an official public education program that was funded by the CIA, and that it was something that was pushed through the mass media, the movie industry, through the radio industry. So this was an official policy that was funded by the CIA and that was pushed onto all of these different media to educate the public that UFOs were ridiculous, this was nonsense, anyone that is looking at UFOs is an idiot, don't take them seriously. So this dissuaded just about every professional out, 99.99% of professionals in academia, members of Congress, people, engineers, professionals in any class, they just, the mass media educated them or brainwashed them into believing that UFOs was ridiculous, and that brave 0.01% of academics, of representatives of Congress or engineers or scientists, that very brave or foolish 0.1%, including yours truly, that came out and spoke about that, we were regarded as idiots and ridiculed, and our institutions disavowed us. And that did happen to me. I was kicked out of American University because of my interest in UFOs and extraterrestrial life. And that has happened to others as well. So it's gratifying to see that the Navy is acknowledging that this public education program of stigmatizing professionals and so forth has been around for a long, long time, and that, thank God, since 2017, the wind has reversed. Now it's blowing in the opposite direction. So rather than being stigmatized and ridiculed for proposing UFOs, you can actually get congressional funding, and you can get serious attention by the US Congress, and the Pentagon is now asking whistleblowers to come forward and talk about this. There's been a 180-degree change, but nevertheless, the stigma is still there. All right, so here we have another government official who's come forward to confirm that crashed UFOs involving non-human intelligence have been secretly recovered and photographed. Jim Semivan is a 25-year CIA veteran, and he's following the lead of other officials and whistleblowers such as David Grush, Jacob Barber, Dr. Hal Puthoff, that have learned about or worked on UFO crash retrieval programs. So let's listen to Jim Semivan talking about that.
When you get down, I mean, if you talk to Hal Puthoff, or you talk to some of the other people involved, they were, involved in OSAP and ATIP, and they will tell you flat out, yeah, we have downcraft, and yes, we have bodies. I've seen pictures. So I'm a believer that we do. Never physically touched them myself, but
you've seen pictures of like a down craft.
Yeah, craft. I just let that go. So when you
okay, so there you have Jim Semivan saying that he's seen photos of downcraft and being pretty nervous about it, because he's concerned that, well, am I violating some non-disclosure agreement? Or am I supposed to talk about this? Am I allowed to talk about this because all these others have talked about it? And in particular, Dr. Hal Puthoff talked about it. And because Hal Puthoff talked about it in a Joe Rogan interview and talked about 10 crash retrieval operations that he knows of that have occurred in the United States, and that this has been happening around the world, that there's been at least 10, that I think Jim Semivan kind of like took that as the cue, as like, oh, it's okay to talk about crashed UFO craft, but then he realized at some point that, oh, I'm talking about seeing photos of drowned craft. Should I be talking about this or not? So I think that's why he was kind of nervous. But nevertheless, it shows that the green light has been issued for whistleblowers, former officials to come forward and talk about what they know or what they saw concerning crashed UFO retrieval programs involving non-human intelligence, that the green light has been given for that. So this is a big, big step forward in terms of where we were like 8 years ago, before the New York Times and Politico published articles talking about a classified UFO program in the Pentagon, and then later on you had David Grush coming forward talking about crash retrieval programs. That was in 2023. So there's been a big shift. A green light has been given for crash retrievals to be discussed, but it's at this stage it's just people coming forward talking about what they saw or what they know. The evidence hasn't been released yet. We haven't had the craft released. So they can keep that going for a couple more years. I mean, there's no doubt about it, that they can do this for another couple of years, that more and more whistleblowers can come forward. The US Congress can have more and more hearings with people like David Grush, Jim Semivan, and even Luis Elizondo talking about crash retrieval operations and them knowing about these. And so, so the public is being educated that it's like, oh, it's real. But none of the craft is released. No aerospace company says, oh yeah, here you come to Skunk Works and here are the photographs, here's the metal, and none of that's going to be. So I think this is the plan. They're going to keep this, they're going to spin this out for another couple of years without or preparing us for when they're going to roll out the actual recovered craft, or come out with the reverse engineering or the reverse engineered craft that have been used for various operations that I discussed earlier, whether we're talking about the 1980 in Tonopah Test Range that Niara Islay saw, or 2004 with the Tic Tac craft that was that the Navy pilots saw and was also tracked on radar before the radar tracking evidence was confiscated by Air Force officers. That the evidence eventually will be released, and some of these craft will be rolled out. But we don't know the timetable. We don't know. It could be in 6 months' time they could start rolling out some of the evidence, because that'll move the thing forward. Or they could just keep this, this going for another year, another 2 years, where they have more and more whistleblowers coming forward, public officials coming forward saying, UFO crashes have happened in the United States. There are more than 10, and I know 3 of them, and these 3 the retrieval, the craft have been retrieved and they're being stored at Area 51 at the S4 facility. That Bob Lazar was right, and so on and so on. So that can be spun. That can be rolled out for another, for the rest of this year or for another couple of years, and then eventually things might move forward with the physical evidence, because that'll be a game changer. When they roll out the physical evidence, then every university on the planet will start to study this as seriously, and I'll probably get a phone call from American University saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, we sacked you back then, Dr. Sala. We want to give you a full professorship and come back to American University and lead the exopolitics department." Maybe something like that happen, probably unlikely, but nevertheless, once they roll out the metals, the materials, and the craft, all of a sudden exopolitics will become an official part of public policy or government policy, or in every university in the planet. All the scientific think tanks will be studying this material that's been recovered. Corporations will be studying it. So things will change tremendously. But between now and then, they're just going to be rolling out more whistleblowers, more public officials talking about, crash retrievals are real. These involve non-human intelligence. And major corporations are studying the artifacts. But we don't know how successful they've been. We have no knowledge of that. So that's what it's going to be for the next 6 months to 2 years. And that'll lead to more and more people becoming interested, but it's not going to shift things tremendously as far as scientific institutions and universities are concerned. They're waiting for the actual metals or the physical evidence of these crash retrievals to be rolled out. Okay, so this is here's a ex-post by Tom from montauk.net, and he gives he cites from a Project Camelot interview with the great Jordan Maxwell. So this interview occurred in September of 2008, and Jordan Maxwell talks about an incident that happened in Los Angeles when he was 19 years old. Essentially, he befriended a girl who she became his girlfriend, and she said at some point that her father wanted to see Jordan Maxwell. So she takes him over to see his father, and Jordan Maxwell says that as soon as he saw her father, he knew there was something different about him. He says that he radiated this aura, this presence that was like you just felt like you were in the presence of a saint, of a guru. And I have felt that once before. There was an Indian guru, Sri Chinmoy, and I went to see him. I think it was in New York City, and it was a packed auditorium, and he was up the front, and he was doing a concert and talking. And as soon as you walked into that auditorium, you could feel his aura. It was just huge. It was just, and you felt this peace, this presence. There's another Indian saint, Amachi. I remember, same thing, big auditorium. And I also felt this very sweet energy emanating from her, even though she was like at the front of this auditorium, at least 50, 60 meters ahead. So James Maxwell said that he felt the same thing with this person who was radiating this aura, this presence. And he says we got to meet him, and then the person starts talking to Jordan Maxwell. Sorry, I said James. It's Jordan Maxwell. Starts talking to Jordan Maxwell and starts telling him about incidents that happened in his life that Jordan Maxwell was shocked because he hadn't mentioned anything, hadn't said anything. But it was like this man was recalling all of that, and Jordan Maxwell was like, the father of his girlfriend was saying, "Well, I'm correct, right? This happened." And Jordan would say, "Yes, it did happen. I did think that, or I did do that, or this was said back then." And so he was just kind of amazed at the knowledge. And then at a certain point, he started talking about a kind of a UFO incident that the extraterrestrials visited Jordan Maxwell at an early age, and the father was saying, "You remember that, right? And you remember this incident? You remember what happened? And we brought you here." And so he was made to realize that he is connected in some way with the extraterrestrial phenomenon. And he was given a book by Charles Fort on Fortean phenomena, and that's how Jordan Maxwell began his career, that he had this incredible incident with the father of his girlfriend, who he realized later, or soon after, was an actual extraterrestrial. And he says that, I think a few days after this incredible meeting and being told about the extraterrestrials, and that the father and the girl and all of that were part of this group of extraterrestrials that were watching over Jordan and making sure he was protected, that when Jordan went to the house of his girlfriend, everything was gone. The girl was gone. Everything was gone. And but he knew then that he was meeting with extraterrestrials. Well, he had met with an extraterrestrial. So quite a fantastic story. Tom from Montauk.net, he extracts the relevant bit there. Or if you want to watch or read the entire interview, or the transcript of the entire interview, or watch it, then the link is here for Project Camelot. So here's another tweet where I discuss a 2014 lecture by Jerry Wills. Now, Jerry is a fantastic healer and an extraterrestrial contactee, and actually even a drop-off, an extraterrestrial drop-off, someone that was dropped off as a baby. I mean, he was told that by extraterrestrials later on in his life, that he was dropped off as a baby to help our planet evolve, and he was gifted with some incredible abilities in terms of electronics. He was an incredible inventor, but then after having his inventions stolen half a dozen times, with people making a lot of money from his inventions, he gave up on that, and he kind of went into healing instead. He's a fantastic healer. He has healed many hundreds or many thousands of people over the years. He healed me. I mean, he really did a great job with me using distance healing. And so he is, in my mind, the real deal. He is truly an extraterrestrial contactee, or at the very least a contactee, but I suspect he is a drop-off as well, because he has this incredible ability to see inside the human body. That this is why he's been able to heal so many people over the years, that he can see inside the body and see what's wrong with them. I mean, he was able to pick things out with me, like what was going wrong. And he said, "Yeah, I went in and fixed that and did this and that." And it was like amazing. But he's been doing that for decades now. And his website, jerrywills.com, if you're interested in his healing abilities, then you can go there and learn more about him. And I just did an interview with him a couple of weeks ago, so that's on my website. But here I wanted to play for you a 1 minute or so clip from a lecture he did back in 2014. So I'm just going to play a minute or so of this, because I want to hear I want you to hear what he says about a very important UFO researcher, Dr. Stephen Greer.
Well, Stephen Greer's doing admirable work, I suppose. There was a point where I kind of lost confidence in him myself, but that's no reflection on anything but my opinion. Remember I told you about the Pleiadians in South America? Well, I invited him to have a meeting with them. He didn't want to talk to me even a little. He basically told me to get away from him. So I figured if he was really interested in having contact with extraterrestrials, he might want to come along. So I figured there must be some other agenda there that I'm just not sure of. So I don't have any other affiliation with him or any greater of an opinion than that.
Okay, so there you have Jerry Wills commenting about him offering to take Dr. Stephen Greer to Peru to meet with Pleiadian extraterrestrials. And Greer declined and told him not to contact him again. And of course, Jerry Wills was very suspicious of that. Now, why did Dr. Greer not agree to go? I mean, Stephen Greer has done incredible work over the years in getting hundreds of whistleblowers to come forward and talk about classified extraterrestrial projects, UFOs, and so forth. And Stephen Greer has been holding these gatherings, these gatherings, CSETI, I think he calls it, where people are trained to be able to summon UFOs and have contact that way. So you would think someone with that kind of background would jump at the chance of going to Peru and meeting with extraterrestrials. I mean, I've been to Peru a couple of times now, and both times I went. I went there to one of the. I went there to meet with the extraterrestrials. I mean, quite simple. I did a Mission Rama retreat in the Chilca Desert in Peru, and there was pretty amazing sightings that we had there, and it was an incredible experience. So someone with Greer's resources, I mean, surely he would have jumped at the opportunity to go meet with Pleiadian extraterrestrials, but he said no. And Jerry Wills refers to some kind of an agenda, that Greer may have some kind of an agenda. Now, this, I think, says a lot about Stephen Greer. Now, I think there is a questionable agenda. I mean, he has, for a long time, said that all extraterrestrials are positive, that stories about negative extraterrestrials, that is just disinformation, government psyops, and so forth. And he's been very, very outspoken on that. But one of the things that I thought was very significant was that in my research of different extraterrestrial groups, I was always wondering, well, who does Stephen Greer most resonate with? I mean, in terms of, because I wrote a book called Galactic Diplomacy in 2013, where I described over 20 different extraterrestrial civilizations visiting our planet. And in writing that book, I got a feel for the different extraterrestrial groups. I mean, empathically, I'm a fairly good empath, and so I got a read on the different extraterrestrial civilizations, and so I got a read on them all. And my reading of Stephen Greer's energy and his physiology and his behavior, his philosophy and so forth, matches with the praying mantids or insectoids. And they're not a bad group, but they're not necessarily a good group either. They tend to be one of these groups that's kind of like in the middle, and they tend to have this non-dualistic philosophy that there's no right and wrong, good or bad. Everything, there's a higher purpose behind everything. So this kind of utilitarian philosophy that, and I think this is what Greer is most closely associated with. So, yeah, that's just kind of, I think, a very helpful insight into Stephen Greer and what extraterrestrials he's working with. Because if he's working with insectoid extraterrestrials, I mean, they would not want to meet Pleiadians. They would not want to meet Pleiadians in the Andes who are working with ascended masters and so forth, because they're just another group. They're the competition. So Greer didn't want to have anything to do with that. So that, to me, tells me that he's working with these insectoids, the praying mantids, as far as I could read it. Okay, so here's a link where I am referring to something Elon Musk said about Starlink and what Starlink is doing in terms of getting humanity to Mars. So let me play a video clip where Elon Musk talks about getting to Mars and Starlink.
Starlink Wi-Fi router, you'll see this image, because the Starlink Wi-Fi is Starlink internet is what's being used to pay for humanity getting to Mars. So I'd just like to thank everyone out there who's bought Starlink, because you're helping secure the future of civilization and helping make life multiplanetary and helping make humanity a space-faring civilization. Thank you.
Okay, so there you have Elon Musk commenting about the success of Starlink, that Starlink has become an internet service that has grown tremendously over, I guess, the last few years, and has become so profitable that now it's raising funds for future missions to Mars. And I think the timetable for future missions to Mars is that an unmanned starship is going to be sent, I believe, in 2026, and that in 2029 will be the next opportunity, because of the orbit of Mars, to send a manned or one or more manned starships to Mars. That would be in 2029. Now, what's very interesting here is that, according to Dr. John Brandenburg, Mars colonization will be the means for announcing the existence of ancient civilizations, and eventually that we are being visited on Earth. So we talked about that in my last interview with Dr. Brandenburg. I've interviewed him twice now. And in our last interview, he talked about how, in his view, the Starship missions to Mars will be how they roll out the existence of extraterrestrial life on ancient Mars, that there's ancient civilizations on Mars, and that's how life was there. And then that'll be the foundation for disclosing more. Now, 2029, do we have to wait to 2029 for those kinds of announcements to happen? Well, as I mentioned earlier on, the disclosure process is moving along very, very slowly, and we can't be certain exactly when they're going to be revealing the full truth. But it does seem that at the moment there is a kind of winding back, a kind of like they're letting some information out, as I was saying earlier, about getting whistleblowers and former officials to talk about crashed UFO operations and so forth, but they're not allowing the evidence of that to come forward. Although there was that video by Jacob Barber of the egg-shaped UFO that had been retrieved, but that wasn't his mission. That wasn't the one that he did. So I guess it's not something that's compelling. It's not something that's conclusive. There's no conclusive evidence yet for any of these officials or whistleblowers who have come forward talking about having seen or knowing about crashed UFOs that makes it conclusive. So that process is going to be dragged out, as I said. Now, could it be dragged out to 2029 or further? Quite possibly. So then we get an idea of what the deep state or what the controllers are going to be doing. They're going to let us kind of play around, or let us hear more and more from whistleblowers and officials about crashed UFOs, etc. And then by 2029, if the SpaceX mission happens to Mars, then you're going to have people on Mars. They're going to walk around. They're going to see artifacts from an ancient civilization. And then it'll be like, hey, look at that. Wow, who would have thought? There's evidence of an ancient civilization on Mars. Wow, amazing. What incredible news. And it's like, of course, people have been talking about this for many decades. I mean, you have Richard Hoagland. I think his book Monuments on Mars came out in I think it was around the year 2000. So people have been talking about this for decades. But nevertheless, that is the plan. Starlink is generating enough funds for future SpaceX missions to Mars, and so by 2029, if all goes well, the first manned missions will land on Mars, and we will, by then, for sure, we hopefully will hear about ancient extraterrestrial civilizations on Mars. But it's looking more and more like it'll probably be by the end of this decade that we're going to have this kind of we're going to have anything like full disclosure, but it's going to be an incremental, gradual process until then. Okay, so here is a tweet, a post by Carb. He shows a 30-second clip featuring Donald Trump talking about let's just say, talking about potential life on Mars. And before Trump could really get into what he knows about life on Mars, he gets shut down. So let's listen to this bit involved.
I get that question as much as almost any question. Do you think that we have aliens coming, flying around or whatever?
What do you think?
There's no reason not. There's no reason not to think that Mars and all these planets don't have life, because
Mars, we've had probes there and rovers, and I don't think there's any life there.
Well, maybe it's life that we don't know, but
maybe there was life there at one point in time. This is a speculation about Mars, that Mars had an atmosphere at one point in time, a long time ago, that could support life. It also had large bodies of water, but we've had no evidence of even bacterial life that exists on Mars. But
I get that question as much as almost any question.
There you have Joe Rogan really just shutting down Donald Trump, and he clearly wanted to talk about life on Mars and being a former president. I think that interview happened during the presidential campaign. Being a former president, you would think that Trump was told things. I mean, we know, according to Professor Haim Eshed, that Trump was in touch with the Galactic Federation of Worlds, and that he was told something about a base on Mars. So to me, this was a real opportunity for something significant to come out, but I find it kind of very annoying how Rogan aggressively shut down Trump and said, he effectively was saying, you're an idiot. You don't know anything about Mars. I'm the expert here, and I could tell you all the evidence tells us that there's nothing up there, that scientific experiments have yet to detect microbial life on Mars. And it's like, wow, this is a former president, and you're just shutting him down because you know more about life on Mars. It was incredible, but that was an opportunity. But I thought this was important to kind of show that Joe Rogan sometimes, that was a gift right there that could have really yielded some incredible information or a lead or a hint or something, but we'll never know now because Joe Rogan shut down Trump. And I think it's well worth kind of seeing that this is what happened, how Rogan did it, and that doesn't reflect well on him. Right, so I want to finish up now by talking a little bit about my monthly live briefing that's going to be held next week. Once a month, I do these live briefings, and this is where I give you an update on events that have happened over the previous month and do a deep dive into some contemporary events, and also give you the opportunity for asking questions in a Q&A. So in this month's monthly live briefing on June 7, I will be doing a deep dive into the significance of this American Pope, what the US Congress is doing, in particular a UAP caucus is doing to promote disclosure, and more whistleblowers that are coming forward talking about crashed UFOs. So those are some of the topics I'll be diving into, and also I'll be looking at some of the major geopolitical events and how they relate to exopolitics. And so that is something you can register for by, there's two ways of registering. One, you can become a Tier 2 Patreon member. So I have a Patreon account. And so if you just go to patreon.com/Michael Sala, that'll be my Patreon account. And you can join the Tier 2, the Solar Patron level. And that gives you access to all of my monthly live briefings. It's only $18 a month. So for $18, you get to do the monthly live briefing and also support my exopolitics work. All of the interviews I put out 3 times a week, that you get to support that as well. So very much in appreciation for all of my Patreon subscribers for their support. Now, if you don't want to join Patreon, you can still do the monthly live briefing. You can just go to the Crowdcast page that has been set up for this monthly live briefing and register through Crowdcast. So details are here. Just go to exopolitics.org, and that way you can find out about how to register through Crowdcast. So that's it for this week's Week in Review. I appreciate you tuning in, and look forward to doing this again next week. Aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Sala. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Sala. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.